Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Intra Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. Our next digital business trends discussion explores how enterprise architecture defines and supports more agile business methods and outcomes. We'll now learn how enterprise architects can embrace agile approaches to build competitive advantages for enterprises and governments, as well as to keep those organizations more secure and compliant. To learn more about attaining agility via the latest enterprise architecture approaches, we're now joined by our panel. Please join me in welcoming Mats Eval. He's Enterprise Architect at Minovate and member of the Open Group Agile Enterprise Architecture Workgroup. Welcome, Mats.
Thank you, Dana.
We're also here with Sonia Gonzalez, Foreman Director of the Architecture Forum at the Open Group. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Dana.
And we're here as well with Walters Obenson, Director of the Agile Architecture Framework at the Open Group. Welcome, Walters.
Thank you, Dana.
And lastly, we're also here with Lukas Rezhnevsky. He's Enterprise Architect at Agile Transformation Consultant. Welcome, Lukas.
Welcome all.
Well, very good. Mats, let me start with you. What trends are driving the choice and motivation behind a career in enterprise architect? What are some of the motivations these days that are driving people into this very important role?
I do think that most people go into enterprise architecture because they want to have a holistic view of the problem at hand. I do think that enterprise architecture really is a mindset that you can use to apply it to any type of issue or problem you have. You look at the issue from many different perspectives and try to understand the fit between the issue or the problem and potential solutions. And I think that's human nature to want to do, to look at things from a holistic point of view. And it's such an interesting area to be because you can apply it to just about anything. And particularly sort of the normal enterprise architecture where you look at the business, how it works and how that will affect the IT part of it as well. So looking at that holistic view, I think, is the important part, and that's the motivation.
Lukas, anything to offer in addition? Why do you think agility in particularly is well addressed by the enterprise architect?
I agree with Mats that enterprise architecture, this holistic view, the possibility to understand how organizations work can enable the agility is I think one of the main enablers for agility, the enterprise architecture. And it could help really change the organization, deliver value. And nowadays, the agility is some sort of the trend, the new way of working, how the organization transforms itself. And for scaling the enterprise, agility in the enterprise architecture is one of the critical success factors.
It's one thing to be a member of this noble profession. It's another for organizations to use them well. So, Mats, how should organizations leverage architects to better sustain an agile approach and an agile environment? It takes not only the individual, but it takes a receptive culture. How do organizations need to adjust?
First of all, we need to distinguish between an agile enterprise architecture and being agile doing enterprise architecture. They're two very different things. And so let's discuss being agile doing EA. To create through Agile EA, the whole organization needs to be agile. It's not just the IT part of it, the EA that needs to be agile. And loosely coupled, it's one of the key concepts, applied both in the business and the IT side to create an agile EA. But to become agile doing EA is really adapting. It's a set of adapting the agile mindset. I mean, we talked earlier about EA being a mindset. Agile, I think it's also a mindset. That you think about things, how to do things in different ways than you were doing before, and you look at all the different agile practices that are out there. For instance, sprints, iterations, demos, and these kind of things. That you need to take them into your EA way of working and create an agile way of working. But you also need to be able to connect your EA with the solution development agile ways of. So EA and solution development in an agile way needs to connect in the long term.
Matt, it sounds a little bit like the chicken and the egg. Which comes first, the EA or the Agile environment? Anything that you can offer, or maybe Lucas as well, on how to get that process started? Where do you begin?
I would say that everything is about achieving the agility at the enterprise. It's not about doing the architecture in Agile way is the one thing, but our main goal is to achieve enterprise agility. Enterprise architecture is just a mean to do that. So we can do the architecture in really Agile way using the sprints, iteration, applying the different Agile methodologies to deliver architecture. But also we can do architecture in more traditional way. But thanks this understanding of how system is complex and how to transform this system in proper way, the organization as a system, we can achieve the agility. And I think that also very important factor when it comes to the starting point is the people's mentality, how the people work in the organization, how they are going to change. And I think it's also very big challenge to many organizations to change the way of working, to change the mindset. And really the enterprise architect has to sometimes take the shoes of the psychologist even, I would say.
Then I would like to add something to reinforce what Lucas just said. I guess like Lucas said, it's a mindset, the change of mind. So first, organization needs to be agile, based on agile principles like delivering value frequently, aligned with the business strategy. And when you do that, you also have to change your enterprise architecture capability to become more agile, starting also with the principle, starting with the process, the way that you do enterprise architecture, like, for example, usually like sprint, like Lucas just said, and also to be aware of how EA governance can also support Agile, because, it is important to deliver value frequently, but it has to be aligned with the organization view and strategy, like Matt said at the beginning, to have the overall view of the organization, but also to be aware to handle properly the risk, for example, and compliance, which are things like sometimes if you go into an Agile effort without considering the whole enterprise, you are facing that risk of different teams doing things in an Agile way, but not connected to each other. So I guess it's a change of mindset that will automatically make you change the way you're doing enterprise architecture.
As Lucas was saying, I think it's very much connected to the entire organization becoming agile. And I mean, it's a challenge. And if you want to do an enterprise architecture for an agile organization, I mean, that's something that probably needs to be done. You need to plan and have, but also open up the change process so it can change in a correct and slow way, because you can't just come up top down, make an organization agile top down. It has to come both from top down and bottom up.
I also hear people asking, I've heard of agile development. Now I'm hearing about agile enterprise. Is this something different than DevOps? Is it more than DevOps? And my impression is it is much more than DevOps, but maybe we could address that. Mats, how does DevOps fit into this for those people that are thinking of Agile only in terms of development?
I think it depends on, the normal way of doing Agile development is doing something in short iterations, and then you have some demos at the end and retrospectives and planning for the next iteration. And that's a discussion ongoing right now, whether or not that the demo doesn't need to be something executable, something that is used quickly in the organization, or could it be just an architecture piece, sort of a couple of models that's showing some aspect of things? In my view, actually doesn't have to be something executable. And also, when you look at DevOps as well, there's a lot of discussions now about industrial DevOps, where you actually produce not software, but produce other technical stuff in an agile way with the iterations, and you do it incrementally.
I would say to this, Matt, speech about the DevOps, that enterprise architecture and architecture itself work as some sort of enabler that allows to deal with the increasing complexity. We have many distributed teams that working on the one product in DevOps mode or in Agile. The complexity of the product, of the environment will be growing. Yeah? So architecture can put it to some proper direction. And I mean also intentional architecture that is not like big upfront design, like in traditional waterfall, but intentional architecture that could enable the iteration and also drive the DevOps team to the proper direction to reduce the complexity, and also it reduces the possibility of failure in product development.
Yes, thank you, Lucas. I've also heard that architects are shifting from thinking about building to assembly, that it becomes repeatable and it starts to cross those organizational boundaries. Does anyone have a response to this idea of shifting from building to assembly and why it's important?
I would like to say that now we have this all ideas of microservices, containers, and such sort of the technologies when you can buy the ready components that are ready and you can assemble entire product, and these components are replaceable, is like the basis of one of the basic elements of the enterprise architecture when we're talking about the architecture and solution building blocks and the good composition of these building blocks to deliver the product. So I think the architecture perfectly address this problem and this sort of shift. So even referring to the TOGAF standard, we have already this concept since years in enterprise architecture developed.
Anyone else on this topic of moving more towards assembly, repeatability, standardization?
This is Mats. On the IT side, yeah, I think that's quite common. It's been common for many years in different ways, and then new things happen. We talked about service orientation for quite a while, and then we started talking about microservices. And these are all type of loosely coupled systems that becomes much more agile in certain ways. The interesting thing is to look at the business side of things. How can you make the business side become more agile? And we've done a lot of workshops around service orienting the business a bit more, or making it capability based. So the business consists of a bunch of services or capabilities, and you can connect these capabilities to value streams and actually be able to change the value streams in reaction to changes in the business side much more easy than the old way of having really strict boundaries between business units and business services that are developed. So we're trying to move sort of the thinking from the IT side up into the business side, and I think that will enable the business to become much more componentized, as you were saying. You put the different business services that the organization produces together in new ways and allows the management to come up with new innovative ideas.
Yeah, no, that really sounds like it gets to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish here. But what are some of the common challenges to attaining such agility when we move both IT and the business to an agile perspective of being able to react and move, but without being brittle, having processes that can be extended without chaos and complexity? What are some of the challenges? Let's start with you, Lucas.
I think that one of the challenges when it's coming to the business architecture is the proper partitioning of the architecture to distinguish the capabilities across the organizational silos, that capabilities cross the silos, keep the proper level of detail that is also connected to the organizational strategy to be able to understand the system. Yeah, also biggest challenge, I think one of the biggest challenges also to get the proper sponsorship for such activity, to work closely to the management board and get their support to proceed with the transformation in the organization.
Yeah, yes, Mats. Change is always hard for a lot of people, and now we're trying to change and have people live in an even more changing world than been in before, and that's going to be very hard. A lot of people don't like change, and we're going to have to motivate people much more and have them understand why we need to change. But the change is going to be happening quicker and quicker, and if we create a much more agile enterprise team, and the changes will keep rolling in faster and faster all the time. I mean, one of the areas where I ran into problem when creating architecture in an agile way was that if you have lots and lots of agile projects ongoing or agile teams ongoing, you have to have a lot of stakeholders that actually comes and watches these demos and actually have relevant opinions about them. And I've seen already in the past when we've done a lot of EA that it's always hard to get the correct stakeholders in, and that's going to be even harder because now the stakeholders going to be be having to look at maybe hundreds of different agile sprints ongoing at the same time. And will there be stakeholders enough for all of that?
Right. Of course, you have to address the people, the process, and the technology. So the people may be even the most important part nowadays.
Dana, this is Sonia. I guess that what it is important also is that right now with all those agile digital trends, what it is more important now is to have two things in mind, which is a product-centric view and the customer journey. In order to do that, somehow the different layers that are in traditional architecture are like blurry, because now it's not about business and IT anymore. It's about the organization as a whole that needs to be agile. And in that regard, for example, is where, like Mats and Luca has said, the right stakeholder needs to be in the whole process. So it's not anymore like saying, I'm the business, so I'm giving this request, and then the IT people needs to solve that. It's not about that anymore. It's having in mind that the product itself, it has services included, it has IT component and also business component. And when you're building your customer journey, you start from the very end, the connection with the customer is making a request using a mobile, for example, all the way to the background platforms that are actually delivering the IT capabilities. So it's having a more cross-cutting view in the way of doing architecture, which is also important.
How does modeling and a standardized approach to modeling help overcome some of these challenges? What is it about what enterprise architects do that allows for agility to become a common thread across an organization? Let's start with you, Lucas.
When it comes to the modeling, the models are different viewpoints are just the tools for the enterprise architects. So enterprise architects should choose proper means to define the architecture that should enable the change that organization needed. So, the common understanding or maybe some stereotype of the enterprise architect is that there are the guys that draw the lines and boxes, and deliver only big documentation that then nobody is using. I think the challenge here is to deliver the minimal product in terms of this modeling that development teams, that the business will consider as something valuable that can guide them. Yeah? It's not about creating large, nice documentation, perfect repositories in the tools. Even if somebody is happy with some nice sketch on paper, it's good architecture, for the architect, because the architecture is about enabling the change in the organization and supporting the business and IT to deliver value. And it's not about only the documenting every component. Yeah, this is my opinion about what is the role of the architect and the modeling. Yeah, and of course we have many different methods, modeling convention, and the architect should choose the proper one for the organization.
Yeah, I don't think that the architects should sit around and model on their own. There should be a collaboration between maybe the solution architects and the solution developers in some way. So it's a collaborative effort where you actually work on the architecture together. So you don't have to hand over a bunch of papers to the solution developers later on, but they already know the whole stuff. So you work in a continuous way of moving the material over to them, and you send it over to them in pieces. We start with the most important pieces first, or the slices of the architecture that is the most important and the most valuable. That's sort of the whole MBA concept, the minimal viable architecture. So you can create lots of small viable architecture, minimal viable architectures, and then the teams, you do that together with the solution teams, and you allow them to work on that, and they continuously create new MBAs, and the solution teams continuously develop new MVPs, and that will sort of go on for the entire length of a project if that's what you're working on, or for a product.
Anyone else want to offer any other typical ways that organizations overcome the challenges to agile enterprise architecture?
Yes, Dana, this is Sonia. In terms of modeling, I guess there are at least two different ways to see this. One of them is the fact that you need to model a high-level landscape for the enterprise in order to have this strategic view and to have some tools to identify which items you should have priorities for going into your backlog and then going into the iteration. You need to be aligned with that. And also, for example, you can model a high-level value stream, identify key capabilities, and then try to define which one would be the items you will be delivering. In that, you don't need to do a lot of modeling. It's just a high-level modeling which you're going to depict that. On the other hand, we have other models that are more solution-level oriented. And in that case, one of the challenges that architects have now in relation to modeling is how to deal with the fact that models are changing, should change faster now because trends are changing and the market is changing. So there are different techniques that can be used for that. For example, test-driven design, domain-driven design, refactoring, all of this. I think Matt's mentioned, having loosely coupled architecture that will allow you to facilitate these different building blocks for changing. And also there are in the market a lot of tools now that will allow you to have automation in the thing you're doing. For example, to automate a testing, which is something that we should do, and it's actually one of the key components of DevOps to automate the testing, to you have really this facility to continue the integration, development, and finally the delivery. So I guess those are, in my view, the two key things in regards of modeling into an agile environment.
Sonia, you mentioned automation, but a lot of organizations, enterprises, and governments are saddled with legacy systems that can be quite complex, that have older back-end systems, require a lot of manual understanding still. So how do we move past the restraints, if you will, of back-end systems, legacy systems, and still become agile? A lot of organizations aren't going to replace those systems. They have to live with them. How can we live with complex back-end systems and still be agile?
I think that's a very good question, Dana. This is Sonia again. I guess that's precisely one of the stronger things about enterprise architecture, and I guess Lucas mentioned that, is the fact that you can use it in different ways and adapt it to different uses. So you can, for example, if you have a bank, which I guess is something that will fit into your scenario, in banks, usually you have a lot of banks still have legacy systems that are very difficult to change and risky to be changed. And most of them are legacy. So what people should do, what companies should do, is to have this combined approach on saying, okay, I could have some kind of like a more traditional EA to handle my background systems because they are more stable and perhaps require less changes. But on the other hand, if you have your end user platform like online banking or mobile banking, in that regard, that development should be faster. So you can have an agile view on that. So you can have a combined view. However, we also depend on the background. So what if my enterprise architecture for my end user contact point is agile, but my background is not? So one of the things that companies are doing right now is to try to go over components and services, microservices, like Max commented, to start building a more loosely coupled architecture without having to change all the background system at once, because that's very risky. So it's some kind of like a combined effort that it can be used in these cases.
Anyone else want to offer some insights on how to make Agile EA backwards compatible?
Lucas. I think that what Sonia said is really important, that we have some sort of combined or hybrid approach for enterprise architecture. So we will always have some projects that run in the agile mode, some projects that have more traditional approach that are longer, that the delivery of architecture will take longer time to reduce the risk when we're replacing some, let's say, for example, core banking system. And, the role of the enterprise architect is to know how to combine these different approaches, how to find this silver bullet to solve all different situations. So we wouldn't be always, looking for the organization on the one perspective that we are agile and everything what was before is a bad practice. We will try to combine, and this is the evolution of organization toward new approach. So we will have to step by step improve the organization to get to the state when we are completely agile. Yeah.
Walter brought up the important issue of governance. I'm curious as to how agile enterprise architecture not only allows organizations to be faster, focus on business outcomes, take into consideration all the technology, but also be more secure and more compliant oriented. So how does EA and Agile EA help an organization attain both a better secure and compliant environment, as well as being more fast and more able to adjust? Would you like to take that first, Mats?
Yeah, I think you need to have of course, you need to have a security architecture, and that has to be set up in a very loosely coupled way, so you can select the security features that are needed for your specific project. You need to have that security architecture as a reference model at the bottom of your architecture, that this is something you need to follow. But the security architecture is not just the IT part of it; it's also the business side of things, because IT security has got a lot to do with the processes and the way a company works as well. So, but all of that needs to be taken into consideration when we do the architecture, and it needs to be known by all the solution development teams that these are the rules around security. I think you can't let go totally in that, but that security architecture needs to be flexible as well. And it needs to be adapting continuously, because it needs to handle new threats all the time. So you can't do one security architecture and think it's going to live there forever. It's going to have the same type of renewal and refactoring things happening to it as anything else.
Anyone else on the issue of security and compliance?
I would like to add, here is Łukasz, that in general, the Agile approaches are more transparent. The testing of the security requirements is done in iterative way, so very often. So this approach can ensure higher security impact. And also the governance should be adapted to the lean Agile governance, when we have some governance body that work in Agile way in a different level of enterprise. So I mean portfolio management, project management, and teams. Yeah. So this is also some organizational change that needs to be done.
You know, many times when I speak with business leaders, they're concerned about mounting complexity. And one of the ways that they're very attracted to trying to combat complexity is to move towards minimal viable products and minimal viable services. How does the concept of a minimal viable architecture perhaps help agility, but at the same time combat complexity? Anyone want to take that?
Here is Łukasz. I would say that the minimal viable architecture is the architecture of minimal viable product that can enable the development of the product, and this can help you to solve the complexity issues with the minimal viable product, to focus on these functionalities, these capabilities that are really mandatory for the organization and can deliver the highest percentage of value in the short term lead time. And also, if the minimal viable product fails, we don't invest too much for the entire product development.
Inherently, I mean, organizations are complex, and I think you have to start very much higher up than the IT side of it to take away complexity. You need to start at the business level, on the organizational level, on the process level, on how you actually do work. And if that's complex, I mean, the IT solutions for that will still be complex. So it needs to have a good enterprise architecture, and minimal viable architecture can test out new things and new ways of organizing yourself, because everything doesn't have to be an IT project in the end. Could be doing a minimal viable architecture, and that's a process change and or an organizational change. You test it out and you say, no, did it actually minimize our complexity, or it did actually increase our complexity? At least we could stop the project very quickly and go in another direction instead.
This is Sonia. I guess handling complexity is challenging, especially for big organizations that have been in the market for a longer time than new ones. And I guess, again, Lucas and Matt say, I mean, you need to focus on the minimal viable product for delivery of minimal viable architecture, and go by slices, like taking smaller pieces to avoid going into too much modeling. However, at the end, even though you're not conceiving things to be only IT, at the end you have a platform to live for, which is the one that is providing your IT capabilities. In that case, in my view, is again, we're having a double use of architecture. It's important. So you may have a more traditional EA for keeping the maintenance of your complex landscape. That's already there. You cannot avoid that or ignore that, but you need to identify which components are there. So whenever you are designing a new product with the minimal viable architecture, you can also be aware on the dependencies there are at the platform level, which is where most of the time the complexity relied on. So that's, in my view, a combined use again of both of them. And the other key thing is here is having the good integration and automation tooling, because sometimes you need to do things manually, and that's where it takes a lot of time. So if you start making some automations of that, then it will be easier to maintain and to allow you to handle that complexity without going against an agile view.
And before we start to wrap up, I wanted to ask you what an organization will experience when they do leverage Agile enterprise architecture and start to become more adaptive in their business in total, holistically. What do you get when you do Agile EA? What do you recognize as metrics of success if this is going well? What should organizations look to and say, we must be doing our Agile activities well because of what we're seeing? How do you measure it? How do you know that you're attaining benefits and utility? Let's start with you, Mats, please.
Each one of these MBAs and MVPs is actually supposed to deliver some business value at the end. And as if you look in a framework like TOGAF, there's a phase at the end where you actually look at to see what did we really achieve this value that we expected to. And this is really part of most product management frameworks as well. So we need to measure before we do something, and then we need to measure afterwards. Did we get this business value that we expected? Because just running a project and at the demo, we can't really tell if we got the value or not. We need to put it out in operations and measure it that way. And so getting that feedback loop, but getting that feedback loop much quicker than we did in the past when we took it a couple of years to develop a new product, and at the end of it, the world had changed. And we didn't get the value, even though we spent many $1 million to do that. Now we might spend a lot less money, but we can actually prove that, we are getting some business value out of this and actually measure it appropriately as well.
I would say I agree fully with Mats that the value is delivered quicker. What I observe also, the product quality is much higher. And also what is important, all the people are much more satisfied. Yes, I mean about the team that delivers the service or product or change the business, the stakeholders, direct clients. So this really impacts the client and team satisfaction. Yeah, this is the one of the important benefits of the Agile and Agile enterprise architecture as well.
And also, just because you have a term called minimal viable product, and you think it's always need to be IT that's doing that, I think you can do a minimal viable product in many other ways, like I was saying before, process changes, organizational changes, and other things. So it doesn't always have to be IT that is the minimal viable product that gives you the best business value.
All right, how about the role of the open group? You have a number of certification programs, you have standards, you have work groups. You're talking with folks who are in the architecture field all the time. What is it that the open group is bringing to the table nowadays to help foster Agile enterprise architecture and therefore a better, more secure, more business-oriented companies and governments?
Hi, Dana. I think I would like to take that first. I guess we have a series of open group portfolio of standards at the open group. And one of the subsets of that is the architecture portfolio that we have. So we have several activities going on. We have the architecture framework, which is a snapshot that is already on the market for test, for comments. It's not yet an approved standard. That one is dealing with Agile into a digital enterprise, and it's talking about lean concepts and DevOps. On the other hand, we have the architecture, the Agile EA at the level of the architecture forum, which is the one with Mats and Lucas are leading. That one is dealing also how to have an Agile EA practice. There's already a very good white paper published, and the team is working in other deliverables like a guide about how to use or make TOGAF Agile sprints using the ADM. So that's another paper that is under construction. And there are also several that are on the way. We also have in the Archimate forum, we have the Agile modeling activity, which is precisely dealing with the modeling part of this. So the three activities are connected. And into a separate working group, even though it's related, we have the digital practitioner working group, which is addressing digital. the digital enterprise. Also, there's connection with the Agile architecture framework, and we just started some effort for some harmonization also with EA and the TOGAF standard. And for security, we recently started the Zero Trust Architecture product, which is precisely trying to address this paradigm of Zero Trust Architecture, which is securing the resources instead of securing the network. That's a joint activity between Security Forum and the Architecture Forum. So some of those are the things that are going on. And also at the level of the Agile Architecture framework, there are also conversations about how to handle security into an Agile environment. So you can see we are several moving things at the table at the moment.
Anyone else on the role and impact of the Open Group? Yes.
Long term, I think we need to look into Agile Enterprise much more. But I think that all these efforts sort of are converging up to that point sooner or later that we need to look to see what would an Agile Enterprise look like. And we'll create reference architectures and ideas for that. I think that will be sort of the end results somewhere, but we're not there yet. And but we go in that direction with all these different projects.
And of course, there's a great deal more information available at the Open Group website, and they have many global events and conferences that people can go to and learn about these issues and contribute to these issues as well. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored BriefingsDirect discussion on how enterprise architecture defines and supports more agile business methods and outcomes. And we've learned how agile enterprise architecture can embrace approaches to build competitive advantages for both enterprises and governments, as well as keep those organizations more secure and compliant. So a big thank you to our panel. We've been joined by Mats Genneval, enterprise architect at Minovate and member of the Open Group Agile Enterprise Architecture Work Group. Thank you, Mats.
Thank you, Dana.
We've also been here with Sonia Gonzalez, Forum Director for the Architecture Forum at the Open Group. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Dana.
We've been joined by Walters Obenson, Director of the Agile Architecture Framework at the Open Group. Thank you, Walters.
Thank you, Dana.
And lastly, a big thank you to Lukas Rezhnevsky, the Enterprise Architect and Agile Transformation Consultant. Thank you, Lukas.
And also a member of the Open Group. Thank you, Dana.
Yes, of course, very active at the Open Group. And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining this BriefingsDirect Digital Business Trends discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of BriefingsDirect discussions sponsored by the Open Group. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your business and IT community, and do come back next time.